Middleton Place, South Carolina. September 12, 1853.
It should have been a night for sleep. The fields lay silent beneath a sky thick with fog, the kind that rolls off the Ashley River and turns every light into a ghost. Crickets chirped in half-hearted rhythm. The only sound louder than breath was the wind brushing past the chapel doors. Inside the small servants' chapel, a candle burned low, its flame flickering with each gust that slipped through the cracks in the wood. The room smelled of damp wood and old hymns. Dust floated in, the air, visible only when the candle caught it right. Eleanor Middleton stood barefoot at the altar, her toes numb from the cold floor. She was wrapped in her mother's silk shawl, its gold stitching catching the candlelight as if trembling with her. Her hair was undone, her breath uneven. Across from her stood Samuel, dark-skinned, bare-chested beneath a worn coat, a slave raised, on Middleton land, once a boy who'd carried water to the house, now a man whose mere presence in this chapel was treason in flesh. Their eyes locked, no smiles, no fear either, only fire and defiance. The preacher, a freedman who worked the gardens by day, opened his Bible with fingers that trembled. His voice cracked as he began, "Do you take this woman?" A hush, a breath, even the candle flickered as if holding its flame. They both whispered, "I do." Imagine standing there, in that silence. No music, no witnesses, no flowers, just the heartbeat of two souls risking everything. You can almost hear it. The creak of the chapel boards, the soft tremor in Eleanor's voice, the way Samuel's fingers curled tighter around hers as if to say, "We do this, or we die never having lived at all." This was not a wedding meant to be remembered. This was a wedding meant to be hidden. But the walls of Middleton Place held secrets poorly. Somewhere outside, past the stables, a shadow moved. A figure paused, listening, watching. The vows were spoken in whispers. The rings were threads of twine tied hastily. The kiss was brief, terrified, sacred. The preacher closed his book with a snap, as if trying to trap the moment before it. Escaped. Eleanor pulled her shawl tighter. Samuel didn't let go of her hand. They were now husband and wife, by no law that Charleston would recognize, but by something far older, far more dangerous. Love born where it was never allowed to grow. But how did an heiress, bred for marriage to a Carolina planter, fall for a man the law named property? And what would happen when their secret spilled beyond the candlelit silence of that chapel? By daylight, Middleton Place was paradise. Brick by brick, it stood as a symbol of low-country pride, a sprawling estate carved beside the Ashley River, its gardens rivaling those of Versailles. Rows of camellias bloomed year-round. Waterfowl glided across reflecting pools so still they seemed like mirrors holding back the truth. Peacocks strutted near the front veranda. Spanish moss hung from live oaks like nature's lace. The Middleton name carried weight in Charleston, political, economic, generational. Inside the house, every room was a shrine to elegance. High ceilings, imported china, tapestries from France, a piano with ivory keys that cost more than most men's lives. The family dined beneath chandeliers, each flame reflecting off crystal goblets filled with Madeira wine. Young ladies curtsied at parties. Men debated in libraries over tobacco and maps. Eleanor Middleton was the crown jewel. Raised in corsets, educated by tutors, promised to a man she did not love, but stepped beyond the garden walls. And paradise gave way to punishment. Past the hedges, past the brick kitchen house, past the cobbled courtyard where children played with marbles, began the fields. The rice fields. Here the world changed. The perfume of orchids was replaced by the thick stench of wet soil and human labor. Dozens of slaves bent at the waist, their legs sunken in ankle-deep water. They moved in rhythm, harvesting by hand, stalk by stalk, hour by hour under a heat that blistered the skin and boiled the blood. Men and women were stripped of names and given numbers. They wore coarse linen, their backs marked by lashes, their hands by calluses, their spirits by silence. Samuel had grown up in this world, born in the slave quarters, schooled by pain, trained by necessity, but different. He learned to read in secret, letters traced in the dirt with stolen chalk. He listened when white men spoke and remembered when they forgot. His mind moved quickly, his tongue rarely. That made him dangerous. That made him visible. He moved between house and field. Trusted but never respected. Punished quickly but never broken. Eleanor noticed that. Even as a child, she saw the fire in him the way others saw it as a threat. Imagine witnessing this contrast with your own eyes. On one side, a girl in lace gloves holding a parasol, reading poetry beneath a tree. On the other, a boy in rags, soaked in mud, cutting grain with a bent blade, while an overseer watched from horseback with a loaded pistol. One world danced in the ballroom, the other bled in silence. And in the cracks between those worlds, something impossible began to grow. Eleanor would sneak down to the garden paths not meant for her. At first, she asked Samuel about the rice, then about books, then about freedom. They spoke only in snatches, beneath weeping willows, behind storage sheds, in the quiet hush of dusk when the manor house fell silent and the fields still whispered with exhaustion. She asked questions no heiress was supposed to ask. He answered with truths no slave was supposed to speak aloud. Their hands brushed once while passing a leather-bound book. They didn't speak of it, but neither forgot. And while the rice kept growing and the chandeliers kept glowing, so did their secret. Because in the shadow of silk and silver, something forbidden had taken root. It began with pages, old ones, faded, brittle, hidden beneath the cushion of a chair in the upstairs parlor. A worn copy of Othello torn at the spine. Eleanor read the title aloud and asked what it meant. Samuel, polishing the silver nearby, answered without looking up. "It's a tragedy." She blinked. "How would you know?" He paused, cloth in hand, eyes still on the silver platter. "I've read it." That answer changed everything. From then on, every stolen moment between them was not just glances or whispers, and it was words, books, ideas. Samuel recited lines she wasn't allowed to learn. She brought poetry hidden in bread baskets, folded between linen napkins. At first it was curiosity, then hunger. Eleanor found herself drawn to the kitchen wing just to hear him speak. He listened when she talked, really listened, which was more than her suitors ever did. He asked questions no one dared. "What do you want, Eleanor? What do you fear? Would you leave this place if you could?" He called her Eleanor, not Miss. That was dangerous. She let him. That was even more dangerous. They met at dusk, beneath the willow tree by the west garden, where the ground was soft and the candles in the house couldn't reach. Sometimes they said nothing at all. Sometimes they read side by side. Sometimes they spoke of dreams. She told him she was expected to marry Benjamin Rowe, wealthy, arrogant, and older by 10 years. She said her father had made the deal over, bourbon and politics. Samuel listened quietly, his fists clenched in the grass. "I don't want him," she whispered one night. He looked at her. "I know." Their hands brushed again. This time neither pulled away. Imagine that feeling. Knowing every glance could cost you everything. That love itself, if discovered, would be branded as betrayal. You can almost feel it. The tremble in Eleanor's voice, the way Samuel's eyes darted toward the house, always scanning the windows. But love does not care for rules, especially when the rules were written by chains. Eleanor began slipping notes beneath Samuel's pillow, wrapped in handkerchiefs, smelling faintly of lavender. He left her feathers, smoothed river stones, pages torn from books. They created a language no overseer could read. It was a love story born in silence. And like all love stories in places of power, it was also a slow act of rebellion. Still, Eleanor knew the danger. One misstep, and Samuel would be whipped. Or worse, one letter, and she would be disowned. Or worse. But she made him a promise. "I don't care about the name, the land, the inheritance. I'll give it up. I'd rather be nothing with you than everything without you." He didn't believe her at first. No slave ever trusted a master's vow. But Eleanor kept returning. And each time she did, she chipped away at the walls he'd spent years building to survive. They planned to run once, to escape north through hidden roads. But a storm came early. The path flooded. Eleanor fell sick. Samuel was nearly caught by hounds. That failure broke something in them. Not their love, but their illusion of escape. And so, if freedom could not be found on the road, they decided it would begin in the chapel. In a vow. In a ceremony meant for no one but them and God. But promises whispered in the dark do not stay hidden forever. And what bloomed in secret was already casting dangerous shadows. Summer arrived with heat that stuck to the skin like wet cloth. Days lengthened, tempers shortened, and the quiet between Eleanor and Samuel grew dangerous. It was no longer just stolen glances and shadowed meetings. It was notes forgotten in books. A smile that lingered too long. A servant who walked into a room at the wrong time. It began with whispers. Rachel, the cook's niece, overheard a conversation by the well. Eleanor asking if Samuel had finished Jane Eyre. That wasn't a question any mistress should ask a slave. It wasn't even a book she was supposed to be reading. Later that week, the head maid found a folded scrap of paper in Eleanor's dressing drawer. It wasn't signed, but the handwriting wasn't Eleanor's, and it spoke of stars, of vows, of escape. By then, the house began to watch her. Her father grew colder. Her fiancé, Benjamin Rowe, started arriving unannounced. Samuel was ordered back to field work, despite being trusted for years inside the house. He said nothing. But the moment he was sent out to cut rice beneath the brutal sun, Eleanor knew. Someone had spoken. The safe world they had built was beginning to fracture. Still, they clung to one another. They met in the chapel again, only briefly. Samuel covered in sweat and dust, Eleanor shaking from fear more than love. "They know," she whispered. "I know," he replied. "What do we do?" He looked at her then, not with panic, but with the kind of grief that only comes when you realize your story was never yours to write. "We finish it," he said. "What would you do?" the narrator asks, "if the walls themselves had turned against you? If every sound might be a betrayal, every step another toward the noose? Would you keep loving? Or would you run before love became your gallows?" But Eleanor didn't run. Not this time. The next day, she went to her father and refused the engagement to Benjamin. He slapped her so hard she bled. She didn't cry. The day after that, Samuel was caught alone in the main house library. He wasn't reading. He was dusting the shelves. But it didn't matter. The overseer dragged him out by the collar and threw him to the ground before the front steps. They whipped him once, not as punishment, but as a message. He bore it without a sound. Eleanor watched from the upstairs window, fists clenched at her sides. That night, she snuck into his quarters with a candle and a Bible. They knelt and swore their vows again. But this time someone saw them, a field hand, young, terrified, paid off the next morning to deliver a message to Mr. Middleton himself. The final thread had snapped. And as the doors closed on their final night together, the house was already waking up to ruin. It happened before sunrise. The mansion's doors burst open with the force of thunder. Hooves clattered across the courtyard stones. Benjamin Rowe had come with 2 riders, pistols drawn and rage burning in his blood. He'd heard the rumors, and now he came to confirm them with fire. Inside, Eleanor screamed as her door was bolted from the outside. She pounded her fists against the wood, voice cracking as she shouted for her father, for mercy, for reason. No one came. Outside, Samuel stood surrounded. 2 overseers held rifles. A rope had already been cut from the stables. Someone spat on the ground near his feet. No trial, no question. No hesitation. Eleanor's father stood on the veranda in his nightshirt, face pale, hands trembling, not with guilt, but with fury. "You dare," he said. You touch what is sacred, and you expect to walk away? Samuel didn't flinch. I touched nothing sacred, he said, except your daughter's heart. They dragged him to the courtyard tree, the same one that shaded the house during garden parties, the same one Eleanor used to climb as a child, the same one where, just days before, she and Samuel had whispered promises of escape. Now it bore a noose. Imagine it, the sky still dark, the only light coming from the lanterns of the riders, the smell of gunpowder, the sound of boots on gravel. You can almost hear the wind stop, as if even nature knew what was about to happen. Samuel's shirt was torn. His hands were bound. He bled from the mouth. No one knew why. Maybe Benjamin had struck him on arrival. Maybe he'd been hit long before this. Eleanor saw it all through the upstairs window. Her fists bruised from banging, her voice raw, her silence now forced. She screamed his name one last time, and Samuel, bloody, broken, beaten, looked up. He smiled, not with joy, not with peace, but with something far more terrifying to those who thought they had won. With love, and then the rope snapped taut. The riders looked away. The overseers didn't blink, and the Middleton name began to bleed. They buried him without a marker. The slaves were forbidden to speak his name. Those who saw it were told to forget it. Eleanor did not forget. They forced her into a carriage 2 days later, her trunk packed by maids who would not look her in the eye. She was sent to Savannah, married off by spring, but she never unpacked the Bible she had hidden beneath her dress. Back at Middleton, the legacy began to rot. The rice failed that year. The storm flooded the eastern fields. One of the overseers went missing. Some say he walked into the marsh and never came back. Others say he was taken. No one ever looked too hard. The house grew quiet. The parlor never reopened. And at the base of the courtyard tree, moss grew thicker than anywhere else on the grounds. And as the blood faded from the stones and the curtains closed around Eleanor's window, the Middleton legacy began to die. Years passed, but the soil remembered. Middleton Place, once the pride of South Carolina, began to decay in slow, deliberate silence. The rice fields were choked by weeds. The marble steps cracked. Ivy crept across the brick like fingers trying to pull it all back into the earth. By the time the war came and the Confederacy crumbled, the estate stood hollow. No more balls, no more carriages, no more laughter in the drawing rooms. The Middleton name still carried weight in Charleston, but only in whispers. Eleanor returned once, just once. She came alone, cloaked in black, her carriage creaking across the overgrown drive. No servants met her. The front door stuck when she opened it. Dust rose in clouds. The piano was untouched, the keys yellowed. In the dining room, single teacup sat on the windowsill, cracked down the middle. She walked to the garden. The willow tree still stood. So did the chapel. So did the tree in the courtyard. She didn't cry. She knelt and left something buried in the soil. No, one knows what. Some say it was Samuel's Bible. Others say it was her wedding ring. After that, she vanished from Charleston society altogether. No children, no letters, only stories. But imagine wandering those ruins today. Tour guides speak of battles, agriculture, elegant architecture, but locals speak of something else. They speak of her, the woman in white who walks through the gardens just before dawn, always barefoot, always facing the tree in the courtyard. They say if you stand in the chapel at 2:11 a.m., you'll hear a whisper, not of prayer, but of a vow. And sometimes when fog rolls in thick from the river, a second figure appears, a man, watching from beneath the willow tree as if waiting for her to join him again. They never meet. They never speak. But they are always there. What endures longer? Power bought with blood, or love punished by it? That's the question that haunts Middleton Place. Visitors walk the ruins, snapping pictures of gardens without knowing what they're standing on. But those who look closely, who listen, feel it. The weight of something unfinished, something once hidden beneath. Candlelight and courage. Eleanor and Samuel's story was never meant to be written, but it lived anyway, passed on not by books but by breath, a whispered name, a rusted ring, a chapel door that never stays shut. The Middleton name was built on tradition, on land, on power, but it was destroyed by a vow whispered in the dark. Stories like this must never be forgotten. If you want to uncover more untold truths, tales buried in shadow, sealed in silence and soaked in consequence, stay with us. Because the next story is even darker.